because according to official government maps of the region, the entire installation simply does not exist. Why is this desert base such a secret? Is the truth about its purpose related to the continual sightings in the area?
Not only did I read briefings and not only was I taught the theories of these technologies, but they were demonstrated for me and I know they are true and accurate.
The most secret projects in the world that our military is looking into, that's where they go. I mean, it's perfect for that.
Abductees have been taken to places that they have assumed were underground facilities. Abductees have also reported that they have seen what appeared to be U.S. military people involved in their abduction.
What's going on here?
I'm sorry, the road's blocked. Let's move it on, please.
Isn't this public land?
Could you please move on?
They're prepared to use whatever force necessary to keep the people as far away as possible from this area.
It means that we're now looking at a monumental work of art created at a time when nobody else on planet Earth is supposedly able to do anything of that magnitude or scale. There's no other contemporary civilization to pin it on. So who did it?
We have the Shag Harbor incident. This UFO encounter is often referred to as Canada's Roswell, so I was shocked that I hadn't heard of it before. Basically, this incident took place on October 4th, 1967, when an unknown object crashed into the water near Shag Harbor, which is a tiny town in Nova Scotia. There were at least 11 people who witnessed this object as it crashed, and many people claimed to have heard a whistling sound followed by a loud bang when the crash took place. The witnesses that claimed to have seen the UFO were all doing a bunch of different things at the time. One couple was just sitting on their porch, but the two witnesses that really get me are a flight pilot and a ship captain. On Air Canada Flight 305, First Officer Robert Ralph pointed out to Captain Pierre Charbonneau that there was something strange out the left side of the aircraft. They reported an object tracking along on a parallel course a few miles away and described it as brilliantly lit, rectangular object with a string of smaller lights trailing the object. Shortly after they first noticed it, there was a large but silent explosion near the unknown object, and then 2 minutes later there was a second explosion, but this one faded to a blue cloud. As for the ship captain, Captain Leo Howard Mercy saw 4 blips on his Decca radar that were totally stationary. This led to him looking up to the sky, and this is when he saw 4 bright objects sitting in a rectangular formation about 28 kilometers from the vessel's window. He wasn't the only one who saw it on board. The entire crew of nearly 20 fishermen stood on deck and watched. A man named Laurie Wickens was another one of the witnesses, and he and some friends ended up calling the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because they saw a huge object floating in the Atlantic Ocean about 1,000 feet offshore. This is all super weird, and not only the RCMP but also the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force became involved in investigations, but nothing was ever recovered or found. But it also revealed that all commercial, private, and military aircrafts along the eastern seaboard were accounted for, so what could have all these witnesses seen? Since they have never officially identified what it was in the official Government of Canada documents, it is listed as a UFO. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Laken Heath Bentwaters incident. If you flash back to the first installment of this series, in part 1 I spoke about the Rendlesham Forest incident, and this one is kind of similar to that one, which only adds to its bizarre nature. In August of 1956, radio operators at Royal Air Force Bentwaters began to notice something strange on the radar. Basically, there was some sort of aircraft, and whatever it was traveling at speeds of over 1,000 miles per hour. Of course, since this was near an Air Force base, they immediately sent training aircrafts up to intercept and investigate, but at that point it found nothing. Shortly after this, a ton of Air Force personnel on the ground began to see a bunch of bright lights in the sky, darting around quickly, and they were also being picked up on the radar again, this time traveling at even higher speeds, closer to 2,000 miles per hour. This is when they sent up 2 Venom interceptors and directed them towards the radar target that was now over Lakenheath. The pilot of the first Venom did achieve contact, but the UFO was quick to outmaneuver him and ended up behind him. The UFO actually chased this pilot for about 10 minutes, despite the pilot doing really aggressive, evasive tactics. The pilot was described as, quote, getting worried, excited, and also pretty scared during this encounter. In the end, they were forced to return to base and the target remained on their radar screens for a short while before it disappeared. The Condon Committee looked into this case and made quite an unusual conclusion. They normally conclude that UFO sightings are due to some natural phenomena or aircraft, but in this incident they wrote, quote, in conclusion, although conventional or natural explanations certainly cannot be ruled out, the probability of such seems low in this case, and the probability that at least one genuine UFO was involved appears to be fairly high. In our number 8 spot today we have the Valensole incident. Okay, I get it. Everywhere's gotta have their Roswell incident, and this one is said to be France's. This sighting was made by a man named Maurice Masse, who was a French farmer, and it took place in July of 1965. One day before starting work while outside smoking, Maurice witnessed an object coming out of the sky and landing in his lavender field about 200 feet away from where he was. He was of course frustrated at someone landing in his field and figured that it was likely a helicopter that made some sort of unauthorized landing, but as he got closer, things took a turn. He realized this was no helicopter and instead was some sort of oval-shaped structure that was standing on 4 legs. In front of the strange craft were 2 figures just under 4 feet tall. He explained that they were making sort of grumbling sounds and included a brief description of these creatures before explaining that one of them took out a pencil-like device and pointed it at him, which left him completely stuck in his tracks, just frozen in time. As he was stuck there, the creatures got back in their craft and took off, and after about 20 minutes he finally regained his ability to move. Here's the thing. To me, this sounds like a fantastical story, but there was some kind of physical evidence left behind that I, and many others, can't quite figure out an explanation to. Basically, the craft did end up leaving a mark. There was a hole and a lot of moisture left over from where the craft was. Like I mentioned, this was in the middle of a lavender field. Soon after, this area became really hard, almost like concrete, and definitely not like the soil everywhere else in the field, and all of the plants around this area started to die. Analysis of the soil revealed that there was a higher amount of calcium in the soil at the landing site than there was anywhere else in the lavender field. This definitely shows that there was some kind of unusual event. Could Maurice be telling the truth? In our number 7 spot today we have the Project Blue Book sighting. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Richard French was once tasked with being an investigator for Project Blue Book, which was the name used to describe a study of UFOs conducted by the United States Air Force from March of 1952 to December 17, 1969, when the project was terminated. While his job was meant to be to investigate and essentially debunk UFO sightings, later in life he took to Congress to stand up to explain his own UFO encounter that he was never able to explain away. The moment that truly stuck with him all of these years was back in 1952 when he set off to Newfoundland after there were reports of a UFO that had crashed off the coast of St. John's. As he arrived to the scene, there were at least 100 people who all stood and stared into the water, and as he was able to follow their gaze and see what they were looking at, he couldn't believe his eyes. He recalled the water being quite clear, and under it you could see 2 circular crafts, each one approximately 18 feet in diameter. He said that they were both floating just below the surface of the water, no more than 20 feet from shore, and not only this, but he could also see 2 beings with the crafts. He said, quote, the first thing I saw was the UFOs, and it was apparent to me that they were doing something to the craft, and I couldn't really tell what because they were on the bottom side of it and not visible to me, except when they would occasionally get over to the side where I could see them. He claims he watched on as the beings worked on the craft until one of them raised out of the water and disappeared, but not before accelerating to speeds in the neighborhood of 2,500 to 3,000 miles an hour. In our number 6 spot today we have the classified report. We aren't even a full month into 2023, but already there are some crazy announcements, including one regarding a report that was delivered to Congress from the Director Director of National Intelligence. Basically, since August of last year, there has been a total of 510 unidentified aerial phenomena observed in protected airspace or near sensitive facilities. According to the report, 26 of them were described as drones, 163 were labeled as balloons or balloon-like entities, and 6 were described as clutter, whatever that means. This is all fine and well, but the concern sets in when we consider that this leaves 171 sightings unaccounted for, some of which, quote, appear to have demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities. It's also important to note that the majority of these sightings are coming directly from Navy and Air Force pilots. Here's the thing, what we as the public know is only a 12-page declassified summary of the actual, real, secret report that was delivered to Congress. Only time will tell if we ever find out what the rest of the report includes or what will happen with the further investigation into the 171 sightings, but hopefully if answers do arise, one day we'll find out. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Westall incident. Taking it back to 1966, we have the largest mass UFO sighting in Australia that, at the time, was largely ignored. This incident took place when over 300 students and staff members of a school in Melbourne all witnessed multiple UFOs silently flying through the air before they landed in a nearby field. While there's been a ton of speculation about this incident in the many years it's been, one witness account stands out among the rest, and that is the account made by the science teacher from the school, Andrew Greenwood. He was alerted to the UFO event by a hysterical student, and when he went outside to see for himself, everything changed. Previously a skeptic of UFO stories, Andrew's mind was abruptly changed when he saw, as he described it, a round silver object about the size of a car with a metal rod sticking up in the air. He went on to explain that suddenly 5 planes came and surrounded the object, all while more people were gathering to watch. He called what happened next the most amazing flying he had ever seen, explaining that, quote, every time they got too close to the object, it would slowly accelerate, then rapidly accelerate, and then move away from them and stop. They would take off after it again and the same thing would happen. This went on for about 20 minutes before the mysterious object just vanished. As weird as this all was, what was almost weirder was what happened next. Firstly, the headmaster of the school is said to have tried to put a stop to anyone talking about the incident at all, threatening severe punishment to any student or staff who was caught speaking about it. And when the Royal Australian Air Force contacted him, he refused to talk to them about it at all. There have also been stories of witnesses getting visits from people warning them not to speak of the incident. Andrew explained, quote, when he asked the physical education teacher to describe what she had seen herself so that he could compare it with his own observation, she just wouldn't say anything. Another witness who did talk to Andrew and described what she had seen in great detail, just 30 minutes later refused to speak to him and wouldn't say a word. Was this because of the threats from the headmaster, or was something else going on here? This is definitely a strange UFO story that leaves behind a lot of questions. In our number 4 spot today, we have Flight 1628. Back on November 17th, 1986, Japan Airlines cargo flight 1628 was flying from Paris to an airport near Tokyo when they had a very strange UFO encounter. On the part of the flight where they were over Alaska around 1711, the crew witnessed 2 unidentified objects to the left of their craft. The 2 objects rose up quite quickly to meet the craft and continued to fly alongside it. Each object had 2 rectangular things that are said to have appeared to be some sort of glowing nozzles or thrusters, but the crew on the plane couldn't see much else. They weren't able to see if there was anyone or anything inside. The closer these objects came to the plane, the more light was let inside, so much so that at the closest points, the plane's cabin was totally lit up, and the captain even said he could feel heat from the lights on his face. After this, the 2 objects left, but this was not the end, because a third, much larger disc-shaped object showed up and started following the plane. In the end, the plane needed to make an emergency landing in Anchorage, Alaska, because this third craft was seriously large and incredibly frightening, and they just needed to figure out what was going on here. The plane landed successfully and investigations were conducted, but to this day, no one is exactly sure what the men on board saw, but the entire crew crew witnessed the exact same thing. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Mount Rainier incident. This incident took place when Kenneth Arnold was en route from Chehalis, Washington to Yakima, Washington on June 24th, 1947. Kenneth was traveling in a privately owned plane when he suddenly saw a bright flash on his wing. He looked around, and this is when he saw a chain of 9 unidentified flying objects approaching Mount Rainier. He explained that he, quote, could see their outline quite plainly against the snow as they approached the mountain. He continued on saying, quote, they flew very close to the mountain tops, directly south to southeast down the hog's back of the range, flying like geese in a diagonal chain-like line, as if they were linked together. From here, he explained that, quote, they were approximately 20 or 25 miles away, and I couldn't see a tail on them. I watched for about 3 minutes, a chain of saucer-like things at least 5 miles long swerving in and out of high mountain peaks. They were flat like a pie pan and so shiny they reflected the sun like a mirror. He also told investigators that he had never seen anything travel that fast in his life. Unfortunately, Kenneth's story was met with disbelief and a bit of ridicule. This made Kenneth quite resentful, but he said, quote, they can call me Einstein, Flash Gordon, or just a screwball, but I am absolutely certain of what I saw. He added that if he ever again saw phenomena in the sky, even if it were a 10-story building flying through the air, he would not say a word about it. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Broadhaven UFO sighting. This UFO sighting took place back in 1977, and it all started when an entire class of children all claimed to see some sort of object flying through the sky. The children rightfully were confused and excited over what they have seen, but of course the teachers and adults around them believed it was just their wild imaginations making things up. This is when they decided to split all of the children up and have them draw whatever it is that they saw. While there of course were variations in all of the children's drawings, they all basically drew the exact same thing, which begs the question, did they really all see this thing? The children weren't the only ones who saw it either. Shortly after their sighting, other local residents began to explain that they had seen something strange flying through the air, including one hotel owner. One of the things that really gets people about this case and these sightings in particular is that all of these people claim to have seen something at that time, and even though it's been almost half a century, not a single one of them has ever said it was a hoax or that they were lying about what they saw. They all have the same story they did the day it happened. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Betty and Barney Hill. The Betty and Barney Hill case is definitely one of the most famous UFO abduction stories ever told, and it absolutely has some pretty compelling components. Basically, the story goes that the two were driving on a road in New Hampshire one night on the way home from a trip the pair had taken. Before they got in the car on their way home, they were at a diner and figured that if they really pushed through, they could beat the wind and rains from an approaching hurricane. It was 10 p.m. when they left the diner, and they figured by around 2 a.m., 3 a.m. latest, they'd arrive home. As they drove, out of nowhere, a bright light started to follow them. Suddenly, they arrived home, and it's somehow daylight now. Their clothes are dirty and ripped, and their watches had stopped working. This is all jarring enough, but neither Betty nor Barney could figure out what had happened. They were both missing time. Later, during a session with a psychiatrist, they were able to recall being touched by aliens during their abduction. Project Blue Book would come to investigate their claims, and while people remain skeptical, no one has ever been able to debunk their story. This officially went on to become the first ever widely publicized abduction story, and to this day people still debate what really happened to the Hills.
Alright guys, Antonio Villas-Boas. On the night of October 16th, 1957, Antonio Villas-Boas was plowing fields when he saw what he described as a red star in the night sky that approached him, growing in size. The craft began descending to land in the field, and he decided to leave on his tractor, but its lights and engine died, so he decided to continue on foot. However, he was seized by a 5-foot-tall humanoid who was wearing gray coveralls and a helmet. Its eyes were small and blue, and instead of speech it made noises like barks or yelps. 3 similar beings then joined and dragged him inside their aircraft. Once inside the craft, Antonio said he was stripped of his clothes and covered from head to toe with a strange gel. He was then led to a large semicircular room through a doorway that had strange red symbols written over it. They then took blood from him and took him to a third room where some kind of gas was pumped into the room, which made him violently ill. Shortly after this, Antonio was joined in the room by another humanoid. This one, however, was female, very attractive. Antonio was then given back his clothing and taken on a tour of the ship by the humanoids. He was then escorted off the ship and watched as it took off, glowing brightly. When he returned home, he discovered that only 4 hours had passed. Now, did he help create one of the first alien-human hybrids? I think so. Number 9. Elizabeth Clarer. Elizabeth Clarer was a South African woman who, starting in 1956, publicly claimed to have been contacted by aliens multiple times between 1954 and 1963. Her first visitation supposedly occurred when she was just 7 years old, and she was one of the first women to claim with an extraterrestrial. She promoted an idea of a better world and beliefs in a cosmic consciousness. In her book Beyond the Light Barrier, she strived to convey a message of peace, love, understanding, and environmentalism, which she credited to the superior wisdom of an advanced and immaculately utopian Venusian civilization. She also ended up promoting conspiracy theories of an international cover-up that kept vital information from the public and claimed to have been threatened with abduction to press her to revealing details about alien technology. Number 8. Terrell Copeland. The Virginia pilot Terrell Copeland claimed that he was abducted by aliens, particularly because he was a Marine. Terrell claimed that his first experience with aliens occurred in 2007 when he captured footage of what he believed to be a UFO on his cell phone from his apartment in Suffolk, Virginia. It was an orb of light, just a big ball of light. It wasn't moving, it was solid white. The other was directly across the street from it, up 300 feet above the ground, and was changing colors very rapidly, he said. He alleged that it wasn't until after he published the footage online that things truly became strange. I woke up from a nap by the sound of someone trying to enter my apartment, and I said, "Who is it?" There was no answer. You could see the doorknob moving and scratching at the door. The firearm, it was on my table, and my thought was to get up and check. Despite the urge to get up, Terrell was paralyzed and only able to move his eyes. Suddenly, he heard a voice through the door tell him, "You don't need that weapon, we won't harm." He then began to experience missing hours as well, and he was incapable of accounting for 4 waking hours during a span of 2 nights. I was in a room and I saw a woman who did not have complete human features. She had the typical black eyes that you hear about, she had an elongated skull, and that startled me. The next memory I have is me standing on my balcony waving at this cylinder-shaped ship, he said. Number 7. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker. The Pescalua abduction was an UFO sighting and alien abduction in 1973, in which Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker claimed they were abducted by aliens while fishing in Mississippi. On the evening of October 11, 1973, 42-year-old Charles Hickson and 19-year-old Calvin Parker told the Jackson County, Mississippi Sheriff's Office that they were fishing off a pier on the west bank of the river when they heard a whirling whiz sound, saw 2 flashing blue lights, and observed an oval-shaped object 30 to 40 feet across 8 to 10 feet high. They claimed that they were conscious but paralyzed, while 3 creatures with robotic slit mouths and crab-like pincers took them aboard the object and subjected them to an examination. Number 6. Thomas Reed. On September 1st, 1969, Thomas Reed and his family in Berkshire County, Massachusetts saw a UFO. In the car with his mother, brother, and grandmother that night, the family noticed a group of glowing orbs dash out of the roadside trees. It came to a stop off the right side of the road, Thomas said. Everything got really calm. It was like being in the middle of a hurricane. It was just like dead silent. Then there was an eruption of crickets and frogs, and it got really loud, and that was it. Then the family suddenly found itself back in the car, but they had inexplicably lost 2 hours of memory. Stranger still, Thomas's mother and grandmother had somehow switched car seats. He said over time the family regained some memory of the incident, including having been to a hangar-like facility with other people. We encountered something, it was definitely not of this world. The hangar thing we were in was huge, it was larger than a football field. The hallway we had seen was circular with a Y configuration, almost to control the flow of traffic, and this one room had a bowed-in wall that was round, he said. Number 5. Whitley Strieber. Whitley Strieber had written fiction for more than 40 years, and he said his writing streak was interrupted one night in the late 80s by an alien abduction in upstate New York. The alleged incident occurred on the night of December 26, 1985, as Whitley slept alone in his cabin in the woods. Woken by a strange noise, he saw a small non-human entity approaching his bed. Then suddenly it was morning. According to him, beings that he has since referred to as visitors entered his home and abducted him. Now, he also detailed another alien encounter that he claims took place in Toronto. Asleep in his Delta Chelsea hotel room in the middle of the night on June 6, 1998, Whitley claimed to have been visited by another mysterious stranger. I got up to open the door thinking it was a room service waiter. It was not. It was a man I described as about 5.5 feet tall, older looking, like someone in his 70s. He wore dark-colored clothing, a turtleneck, and charcoal slacks. He claimed the visitor stood motionless by the window for nearly an hour, expounding on the dangers of creating an intelligence more involved than its creator. He said it was the most extraordinary conversation I've ever had in my life. Number 4. Frederick Valentich. On October 21st, 1978, Australian pilot Frederick Valentich disappeared into thin air. At 7:06 p.m., while at 4,500 feet, after departing, he reported that an unidentified craft was following him. Melbourne Flight Service insisted that there was no traffic near him, but the pilot was adamant. He explained that it had 4 bright lights and suddenly passed 1,000 feet above him at a remarkable speed. For 5 straight minutes, Frederick described its movements and shiny metallic exterior. Suddenly, he experienced engine trouble and said the aircraft was hovering and it's not an aircraft. Then they never heard from him again. The last sound radio officials heard was a metallic scraping sound. Now, authorities presume that he had crashed, but a later search of the area yielded nothing. In 2014, a UFO action group in Victoria alleged that a farmer observed a UFO nearly 90 feet in length hovering above his farm on the morning following Frederick's disappearance. The farmer also claimed that the pilot's plane was stuck to the UFO, leaking oil. But again, Frederick and the plane have never been found. Ultimately, a few possibilities regarding the disappearance of Frederick exist: that he crashed and his remains were never covered, that he purposely disappeared, or, of course, he was abducted by aliens. Number 3. Audrey and Debbie Hewins. Twins Audrey and Debbie Hewins said they were abducted by aliens. I was probably about 5 years old or so, said Audrey, and a bright blue light would come into the room and the door would open, and there would be like a foggy kind of misty blue light just shining through the whole house, and these 2 figures would come in. We have been up in crafts and seen our house from above. They're very good at mind erasing, or whatever you want to call it. They'll leave you with bits and pieces of things that you can remember. Debbie added, I remember one time being on a spaceship and standing there on the spaceship and the floor and the walls disappeared. They started doing all kinds of experiments on us when we were 12. While she was initially hesitant to come forward, Audrey claimed that after a non-human entity saved her life from drowning in the ocean, she was inspired to dedicate her life to openly discussing her alien abduction experiences. Number 2. Travis Walton. On November 5th, 1975, Travis Walton was abducted by aliens and he didn't return for 5 whole days. Travis's abduction began after working at the Site Graves National Forest near Heber, Arizona. Travis and a 6-man group of loggers were returning home when they allegedly spotted a shiny disc spanning 40 feet in diameter hovering in the sky above them. He said it was a metallic glowing disc making some very strange sounds. The closer I got to it, the more scared we all got, and they were swearing at me to get away from there, and when I got up close, it suddenly got louder and started to move. Travis then claimed that non-human beings abducted him and experimented on him until he fought them off. But as the being supposedly poked and prodded at him on a kind of table, 5 days elapsed on Earth where Walton was officially declared missing. I became conscious inside the craft, and I believe I was in the hospital. I was in a lot of pain, and as I became more conscious, I looked around and saw alien beings, and I just panicked. They were much smaller than me, and I think that's the reason why they gave up. Once they found out they couldn't control me, they split. Now, later research conducted at the site of Travis's abduction showed an unusual growth rate in the trees where the craft had allegedly hovered. The trees near the site were found to be producing wood fiber at a rate of 36 times greater than they had been in the decades before. And coming in number 1 is Dr. Albert Bender. One of the most famous instances of alien invasion was the case of Dr. Albert Bender. Albert was a very intelligent researcher with an interest in aliens and UFOs, and even founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau. It was successful as he began to gather lots of alleged evidence related to UFOs, but soon he began seeing strange men watching him around his town, reportedly with glowing eyes. Then one night in 1953, 3 men in black showed up to his house. The mysterious men looked at first to be government agents, but he soon discovered they were something from a completely different realm. The men made it clear to Albert that he was to immediately stop all UFO research and investigation and to cease any publishing. They then confiscated most of his findings before threatening him once more and vanishing. Then he had a second encounter where he was visited by 3 shadowy figures. They did not touch the floor but hovered above it, and they told him that their human appearance was an illusion and that whatever information he told people about their visitation would not be believed. They supposedly told him that they capture people from Earth and use their bodies to disguise themselves. Now, due to all this, Albert was so afraid of the experience that he immediately halted all publishings, quit ufology, and turned into a completely different man. Years later, he published a book about his experience with the Men in Black and went on to manage a motel and never touched extraterrestrial research ever again.
With the Navy UFO sighting. So back in 2020, the Pentagon released video footage taken by United States naval aviators of strange objects hurling through the sky. They moved in ways no known aircraft does, and pilots described them seeming to defy the laws of physics. In these series of videos, they're completely confused and shocked about what they're seeing. The videos were recorded back in 2004, so the Pentagon were holding on to these for a long time, and the fact that they were finally released really says something about how much of this could be going on. They can't keep it under wraps any longer. It's getting to the point now where even the government is like, yeah, people kind of need to be informed about at least some of it. I mean, who knows what they're still hiding though. If you're liking the channel so far, by the way, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We got awesome content coming at you on the daily. At number 9 is the Kenneth Arnold UFO sighting. This is one of the most important UFO sightings in history. It happened on June 24th, 1947, and is a pivotal event in the history of UFOs. Now, NASA has not been established at this point, but the event made a huge impact on government policy regarding unidentified flying objects. Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot, reported seeing 9 strange crescent-shaped objects flying in a V formation near Mount Rainier in Washington. He estimated their speed at around 1,700 miles per hour, much faster than any known aircraft at the time, and Arnold's sighting received widespread media coverage, leading to increased public interest in UFOs. And this event is often considered the first modern-day UFO encounter. In the following weeks, there were numerous reports of UFO sightings across the United States, leading to the coining of the term flying saucer. This case also had a huge impact on government and military agencies. The US Air Force initiated Project Sign, the first official government investigation into UFOs. This eventually led to the formation of Project Blue Book, a long-running study of UFO sightings. So, this sighting not only heavily contributed to the curiosity surrounding UFOs and aliens that continues to this day in pop culture, but also contributed to the scientific inquiry and government policy when it comes to UAPs. Next up, we have Frank Shaw's gargoyle. So this one isn't your standard UAP in that it's a winged cryptid sighting, but it was seen by multiple NASA employees at the time, primarily Frank Shaw, who worked in Houston's John Space Center. On the night of the incident, Shaw was on his way back to his car at the end of his shift when he spotted something strange. It was what looked to be a massive winged humanoid creature perched on one of the Space Center buildings, almost like a gargoyle or bat creature. And suddenly it started unfurling its wings, which Shaw described making this crackling sound before it swooped into the air. Shaw was just stunned, unable to move, having no reference for what he had just witnessed. Suddenly he snapped out of it though, and he rushed to his car. Now, if this were just a one-time thing, I'd be like, alright, maybe he was just really tired, maybe he just saw something totally innocuous and just freaked himself out, yada yada. But it wasn't just a one-time thing. There were other employees at the station who had also encountered a winged creature. Apparently there had even been a file opened on the thing just a few months before Shaw saw it, after 2 German shepherds at the station had been found completely torn apart, and they were found in the same area that Shaw saw the creature. At number 7, we have high altitude objects. So the story here is that several mysterious high altitude objects were down in February of 2023 over various airspaces. You probably remember this in the news. We had objects being spotted over Canada and the United States, Latin America, China, Eastern Europe. Started when several unidentified objects were down over Alaska, the Yukon, and Lake Huron. The general of NORAD, Glenn D. Van Herk, made a statement saying the objects could be benign but wasn't 100% sure. When asked if they could be of alien origin though, he said he wasn't ruling anything out. It literally seems like government and military agencies are just starting to become more open to the idea of extraterrestrial life, or maybe some of them already are fully aware of their presence. Either way though, it seems like they're being discussed openly more than ever before. It's not being written off as nonsense like it has been in the past. And here's another interesting part of these cases. There were recovery attempts made. Unfortunately, the objects landed in areas that aren't all that accessible though, so it made it pretty difficult, and the recovery missions were abandoned. Now, that's what they say, but what if the government did recover something that they just aren't ready or willing to show us? Who knows? At our number 6 spot, we have Oumuamua. This one's definitely been talked about plenty of times, including on this channel, but it's a recent article dated March 7th of this year that I'm mostly referring to. In a recent article written by Sean Kirkpatrick, head of the Pentagon's AARO, or All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which specializes in unidentified flying objects, and Harvard professor A.V. Loeb, they discussed the possibility that objects like Oumuamua spotted back in 2017 could be of alien origin. The article said that objects like the Oumuamua could be quote-unquote a parent craft that releases many small probes during its close passage to Earth. They didn't just discuss the Oumuamua though, they were looking at a variety of unidentified probes. And they went on to speculate that these crafts could potentially power their batteries from starlight, and that Earth's water could be fuel. There's some pretty wild stuff in there, and yes, a lot of it is speculative, but the fact that a highly respected scientist that spent 20 years studying physics is proposing these kinds of ideas, it's pretty fascinating. Coming at number 5, we have the Alaska sighting. The event began when Japan Airlines Flight 1628, a cargo plane, reported encountering an unidentified flying object during its flight. The pilot, Captain Kenju Taruchi, and his crew described seeing a massive disc-shaped object with glowing lights flying in close proximity to their aircraft while flying over Alaska. They also reported that the object displayed erratic movements, seemingly defying the laws of physics. Ground radar stations at Anchorage International Airport even tracked an unidentified craft that matched the flight's description. The radar data not only confirmed the presence of an unknown object, but also its proximity to the airplane. And after the incident, all of the data, including the radar records, was reportedly collected and presented at a meeting with officials from the FBI and the CIA. According to witnesses, these government agencies acknowledged the radar recording as evidence of a genuine UFO, but they later disavowed any knowledge of such a meeting. Number 4, the Richard French sighting. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Richard French was an investigator for Project Blue Book in the 1950s. Long after retirement at a citizen hearing on disclosure in 2013, French made a shocking statement. His job had been to solve cases involving supposed UFOs, usually by debunking them, but as it turns out, he had actually seen one himself, although he hadn't included it in his report at the time. The 83-year-old described an incident that took place during an investigation off the coast of St. John's, Newfoundland back in the day. 2 mysterious aircrafts had reportedly crashed into the water. He had followed a group of about 100 onlookers on a nearby wharf and described seeing 2 to 3 foot tall beings, thin and gray, looking to be repairing their vessels. He then watched in awe as the crafts rose out of the water before flying off at incredible speeds. Next up, we have the Phoenix Lights. On March 13th, 1997, in Phoenix, Arizona, USA, thousands of residents reported seeing a series of strange lights in the sky. The lights were described as bright and hovering slowly in a V-shaped formation. This event unfolded in 2 parts. First, there were reports of lights moving slowly across the state, from the northern to the southern region. Then, later in the evening, a stationary V-shaped formation appeared over Phoenix and lingered for several minutes before vanishing. The official explanation initially attributed to the lights was military flares being dropped during a training exercise, but this explanation didn't match the descriptions given by witnesses who reported a massive silent object blocking out the stars. Some speculated it was a UFO, while others believed it to be a secret military aircraft. At our number 2 spot, we have the Rendlesham Forest Incident. The Rendlesham Forest Incident, also known as Britain's Roswell, is one of the most well-documented UFO events in history. It occurred in late December of 1980 near Royal Air Force Woodridge, or RAF Woodridge, a US Air Force base located in Suffolk, England. Over a couple nights, multiple military personnel reported encountering strange lights and objects in the forest adjacent to the base. On the night of December 26, 1980, U.S. Air Force personnel, including Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, investigated reports of unusual lights in Rendlesham Forest. They witnessed strange colored lights in the sky and on the ground. Halt recorded his observations on an audio tape describing the lights as red, green, and blue, and confirmed the presence of an unidentified craft. 2 nights earlier, on December 24, 1980, security personnel at RAF Woodridge reported seeing a triangular-shaped object with red and blue lights hovering above the forest. It appeared to land and leave impressions on the ground, and when radiation readings were allegedly taken at the site, it indicated unusually high levels. And finally, we have the 1952 Washington, D.C. UFO incident, also known as the Washington Flap. During 2 consecutive weeks in July of 1952, a series of UFO sightings occurred in the airspace over Washington, D.C. On the night of July 19, 1952, radar operators at Washington National Airport detected a cluster of these unknown objects flying at very high speeds. Witnesses on the ground reported seeing bright lights moving erratically in the sky. Similar sightings recurred on the night of July 20th, prompting the U.S. Air Force to scramble fighter jets in pursuit of these objects. Pilots reported seeing the objects visually, describing them as glowing lights that defied the laws of physics with their sudden accelerations and maneuvers. The CIA took a keen interest in this case, conducting its own investigation. Declassified documents have since revealed that the CIA closely monitored the events and requested daily briefings on the sightings. To this day, these sightings have not been fully explored.
Number 10 spot, we have the Russian UFO. Just yesterday, Russia saw some kind of unidentified flying object overhead, and it caused them to need to shut down their airspace over one of their biggest cities. Passenger planes from Pulkovo Airport in St. Petersburg were grounded after the reports of a mysterious object started coming out. The military ordered the closure in order to not only investigate, but also to try and keep everybody safe. Right now, the best guess as to what this UFO could have been is likely a drone, with officials saying the object was heading towards the Gulf of Finland, but even if it was just a drone, they have yet to decipher where it came from or what its purpose was. Apparently, Russian officials haven't yet confirmed that there really was a UFO, but they did confirm the closure of the airport. Russian citizens also got quite a fright when they received alerts claiming an air raid was taking place and they were told to seek shelter immediately, but officials later claimed that the alert was, quote, fake, and it is suspected to have been a hacking attack. In our number 9 spot today, we have the UFO convoy. This sighting comes from someone on Reddit who swears that they passed a UFO in transport, and they even have the videos to prove it. Their post reads, quote, backstory, I was coming from LA and after passing Bakersfield, the freeway started to slow down and traffic started to pile up. Once I got close to the source of the traffic, I decided to record what was going on. I was able to record what looked like a UFO saucer-shaped object. However, I did pass by it fairly quickly. Once I passed it, I kept questioning myself, what did I just see? But I decided to brush it off thinking it might be replica for some UFO carnival or alien event. After passing the UFO about 5 miles out, I decided to take an exit and use the bathroom. After the restroom break, I got back onto the freeway the exact same time as the convoy with the UFO was passing me while I was entering the freeway. I was not able to make a video of that specific moment. Once I was on the freeway, I saw 2 vehicles blocking each lane going CA5 north. Both cars seemed to have federal license plates. As well, ahead of them was a convoy of 2 CHP trucks with their lights on, blocking both lanes. Ahead of the two CHP trucks was the big rig hauling the alleged UFO, and in front of it were two more CHP officers. Though I was able to make a video of the convoy as it was exiting the freeway, and when I looked at it under more light, I was amazed to see something so similar to a UFO. Again, I'm not clearly sure what I saw, but with all the circumstances and what was occurring in that moment, it seemed to be a UFO. Also, when shooting the last part of the video, the federal agent in the white pickup truck seemed to speed up and block my view of recording. At first I thought, why would they not cover it up if it was a real UFO of types? But then I thought, maybe that's the whole plan. Hide it in plain sight. It's very sneaky, alright? In our number 8 spot today, we have the advanced technology. So this UFO sighting comes from a while ago, but it just recently became relevant, and that is because some former US Air Force personnel have begun explaining to the Pentagon that they believe back in the 60s there were UFOs that supposedly had the ability to turn off their nuclear warheads. Apparently, these officers recently told this to the government's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, who had contacted former Air Force ICBM launch officer Robert Salas to get information about the encounter with an orange flying disc that switched off 10 warheads at Maelstrom Air Force Base in Montana in 1967. There was another former officer, Dr. Robert Jacobs, who also apparently told the AARO that he had gone as far as to make a film of the UFO for the Air Force in 1964, and that this film captured images of a UFO shooting a test missile out of the sky. With the piquing interest in UFOs and the potential for an advanced civilization apart from our own, it appears as though the government is spending more time now researching and looking into these claims because, well, why would they make them up and continue on with the same story some 50 years later? In our number 7 spot today, we have the Texas 2022 UFO. This UFO video came from Reddit and was posted by the user SolarBoy1. With the video, they posted the statement that came from the girl who had sent them the video. The statement reads, quote, "This happened at 5:09 a.m. I was not about to go out there when I wasn't even dressed, and I was scared. People always think they would have done things differently if it was them, but you never know what you'll do when you are actually having that experience. I always thought I would be doing the most to get a better view and record, but my anxiety was triggered and I could not go back to sleep after that. I was only recording to show my boyfriend, who was awake at the time since he works night shift. Pretty much disappeared after I don't know where it went. I honestly felt in that moment that they knew I was watching them when the light shined towards me. It was so bright. That's when I got really scared. I have a Tia that's kinda psychic, like she just always knows things and sees stuff, and she called me right after it happened because I sent the video in our family group chat. She said, we are going to start seeing UFOs more often in this new year and that they are going to reveal themselves more. I know I don't know her, but I fully trust this lady's aunt. I feel like she knows something, and considering this was before all of the UFO panic in the last few weeks, it seems like she really was onto something. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Las Vegas UFO. Back in December of 2022, just a couple days before Christmas, residents and visitors in Las Vegas were stunned as they looked up to the sky and saw something none of them had ever seen before. It appears as though an object with big glowing lights on it was hovering in place just above the clouds. Not only this, but the moving lights from the Las Vegas Strip, every time they ran past this object, rather than illuminating it, it seemed as though the object just reflected the light in a very odd way you wouldn't necessarily expect. Of course, Reddit blew up with videos and photos and questions and theories, and there is a leading theory, but I personally am not totally convinced. Basically, they say that this was all due to a really rare phenomena that is almost never seen in Las Vegas except for somehow that night. Basically, they say that the weird lights and reflection and everything is just a result of ice crystals hanging in the air. Of course, I'm sure there's a more sciencey explanation, but to me, this all just seems a little too convenient. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Rendlesham Forest incident. This incident is often referred to as Britain's Roswell incident, and it took place in December of 1980. The incident took place in the Rendlesham Forest, which is a pine forest in England that, at the time, sat in between two United States Air Force bases, RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge. Over several nights around this time of year, a number of credible military personnel reported strange and colorful lights both above as well as in the forest. Some of those those who were sent to investigate the strange lights reported seeing a triangular craft at close range, and there was even a famous audio tape made of the encounter. After these happenings, the UK Ministry of Defence claimed that the incident posed no threat to national security, and because of that, it was never investigated further. What really happened in the forest all of those years ago remains a total mystery, but those who actually witnessed the lights and the aircraft are said to have remained totally baffled. In our number 4 spot today, we have the New Jersey UFO. This UFO sighting took place in 2001, just above the New Jersey Turnpike. On July 14th, 2001, just after midnight, for around 15 minutes, motorists driving down this highway stopped to stare at the sky to witness what no one could believe. There were strange orange and yellow lights in a V formation just above the Arthur Kill waterway. There were a ton of witnesses who were all extremely confused and shocked as to what they were seeing. Air traffic controllers initially denied that there were any flying objects that could have caused the mysterious lights, but a group that is called the New York Strange Phenomena Investigators claimed that they received radar data that night that would corroborate the story that the witnesses were telling. It may not have been aliens, but it certainly was some sort of unidentified flying object that no one had ever seen before, and there were people from all walks of life witnessing it together. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Belgium wave. Nearing the end of November of 1989, citizens of Belgium were shocked to report seeing a big triangular UFO hovering in the sky. Aside from these reports from the visual witnesses, however, there wasn't any physical evidence supporting the existence of the UFO. Flash forward to a few months later in March of 1990, and new sightings began to pop up, but this time their presence was being confirmed, this time by 2 military ground radar stations. Here's where things get really strange though. 2 F-16 fighter jets were sent out to investigate what was going on, and this is when the pilots found that they couldn't see anything visually, but their radars were able to spot the target. While trying to keep track of these objects, the UFOs were just moving way too fast, and the pilots ended up losing track of them. In the end, there were about 13,500 people who witnessed this UFO incident, which has made it one of the most widely experienced UFO sightings of the modern era. The Belgian Air Force had no idea what it was that was witnessed, but they thankfully did acknowledge that some sort of unknown activity had taken place, instead of just trying to sweep it under the rug and pretend like nothing happened. In our number 2 spot today, we have the cylinder UFO. This UFO sighting doesn't really come with a crazy story or anything, but the video truly does speak for itself. It's weird, and if I saw this on an afternoon with a perfectly clear sky, I would probably take my phone out and start recording as well. The video was taken in the summer of 2021 around noon one day by Reddit user I Broke the Box. The video shows them zooming in and out on some kind of object that is flying through the sky, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before. I don't know if you've ever had like a floater in your eye before, but at first it kind of looks like that, like some weird cylinder just floating around. But the appearance changes slightly when it seems like maybe the sun is reflecting off of it. People in the replies have tried to speculate over what it could be that is in this video, but no one is entirely sure, so I have to ask, what do you think it is? In our number 1 spot today, we have Flight 1628. Back on November 17th, 1986, Japan Airlines cargo flight 1628 was flying from Paris to an airport near Tokyo when they had a very strange UFO encounter. On the part of the flight where they were over Alaska around 1711, the crew witnessed 2 unidentified objects to the left of their craft. The 2 objects rose up quite quickly to meet the craft and continued to fly alongside it. Each object had 2 rectangular things that are said to have appeared to be some sort of glowing nozzles or thrusters, but the crew on the plane couldn't see much else. They weren't able to see if there was anyone or anything inside. The closer these objects came to the plane, the more light was let inside, so much so that at the closest points the plane's cabin was totally lit up, and the captain even said he could feel the heat from the lights on his face. After this, the 2 objects left, but this was not the end, because a third, much larger disc-shaped object showed up and started following the plane. In the end, the plane needed to make an emergency landing in Anchorage, Alaska, because this third craft was seriously large and incredibly frightening, and they just needed to figure out what was going on. The plane landed successfully and investigations were conducted, but to this day, no one is exactly sure what the men on board saw, but the entire crew witnessed the exact same thing.
Flashing lights in China. I mean, if you see some flashing lights floating around anywhere in China, it might be a UFO, or the air might be exploding because the pollutant levels are so high. I had a buddy who was living in Beijing, and he said every morning when he would wake up, he would blow his nose, and it would be black. That is disgusting. That can't be good for your life expectancy. Well, exploding air or not, These orbs are definitely not a normal occurrence. They were spotted all over the country at different times of day over the course of a single day. They look sort of like the exhaust port on a camouflaged alien ship. It's absolutely nuts. In typical UFO fashion, they're just floating around in the sky. I would assume that if they are aliens, they came here for some sort of surveillance. Maybe they think we're cute like dogs, and they just come around, take a bunch of pictures, and they're like, oh my god, look at them, they have their own transportation and healthcare systems, they're adorable. Number 9. English UFO sighting. Next we head to jolly old England, where there's flying saucers in the sky, and if the internet is right, there's lizard people in the monarchy. This footage was caught right off the M5 highway, and it's pretty convincing. We can see what looks like classic flying saucers hovering above the ground. But who knows if this is actually something flying up in the sky or just an optical illusion. Maybe someone just did the most insane frisbee throw of all time, and now that thing is just hovering like your girlfriend waiting to steal your fries. But then we see a military fighter jet pass by the object. I don't know about you, but I don't think the military spends millions to take its fighter jets off the ground to look at Riley's epic frisbee launch. And these two fighter jets pass not once, but twice, and then we can see the object do some sort of spin in the sky. Even though this whole thing was caught on camera and the military clearly got involved, when questioned on the matter, the British military had no comment. Come on guys, just give us a little juice. Number 8. Dancing lights. We got some footage that isn't a UFO, but it's definitely something that I've never seen before floating around in the sky. It looks like pure energy that's just balled up and pirouetting through the clouds. I guess it could be some sort of static energy buildup up there in the sky that's just kind of on the loose, and frankly I'm not smart enough to know whether that is or is not possible. But it does seem to move in a controlled motion. It kind of swims up and down. And out of all the UFO videos I've watched, I gotta say this one is the prettiest. I don't think we're gonna make a list of the most stunning unidentified flying objects, but if we did, this would definitely be high on the list. I bet if you could contain this thing like something you could sell to rich people, it would take the place of chandeliers. This one was also spotted in the UK. It seems like there's something going on over there. Unlike our last video, the military doesn't swoop in and take a closer look. There's some people on the internet who claim this video to be a fake. And if you're out there making fake UFO videos, get a better hobby, man. You're clogging up all the authentic UFO footage. Number 7. Splash zone. Imagine you're a good, God-fearing fisherman in Spain, and then you see some crazy thing flying through the sky, and it makes you question God and everything you ever trusted. This footage is crazy. It was taken in Spain off the coast of the Galicia region, and it shows some sort of UFO blast over a fisherman's boat out in the middle of the ocean, and then boom! The whole thing plunges underwater. This is absolutely insane. You see a massive splash from the aircraft entering the water. The speculation around this is that there is secret underwater alien bases. Like, duh, that's why we know more about the moon than we do about the ocean floor, because the government is hiding all the cool aliens down there and they don't want us to hang out with them. I mean, it would be the best place to hide them. Unless you've got a state-of-the-art submarine, which is super hard to get on Craigslist, there's no way you're gonna find anything. Number 6. Fire in the sky. Remember that list I made up of top 10 most stunning unidentified flying objects? Well, this one would definitely be on the list too. This thing looks super cool. It makes it look like there's a fire in the sky. Now I couldn't dig up that much information on this, and I mean this is grainy cell phone camera footage of what might be an alien spacecraft, so whatever I dig up off the internet is just probably an educated guess like my own. But it seems like this UFO could be doing one of 3 things. It could be doing some sort of repairs. Maybe it entered our airspace because it was a safe place to stop and do a little pit stop checkup. The ship could also be doing the opposite, on its way down for a crash landing. Or 3, it could possibly be dumping something. As you watch through the footage, it almost looks like a crop duster leaving a trail behind. I'm sure whatever an alien spaceship is dusting our planet with is harmless, don't worry about it. Number 5. Boy Scouts. You're just trying to be a good Boy Scout and learn a bunch of stuff about the Catalina Channel, and then nearly 100 UFOs appear out of nowhere and your Scoutmaster is too busy looking at them instead of teaching you about how to tie new knots or whatever Boy Scouts do. I don't really know. Well, this happened to Alan Bergholt in 2013. He saw the sky light up with UFOs, and then they started diving into the Catalina Channel, which further reinforces the possibility of the underwater UFO theory. We've been looking for UFOs in space and they've been right under our noses this whole time. Number 4. Surprise. Holy, this one is probably one of the best pieces of UFO footage I've ever seen, and we're only on number 4. This was caught on some CCTV footage in Australia. It's just some regular old lightning, just some regular old clouds, and then out of nowhere there's a goddamn spaceship in the goddamn clouds. Are you seeing this? I bet they thought they were being sneaky with their little camouflage in the clouds. I bet the captain of the spaceship was pissed at the guy who's in charge of parking the ship. Like, what the hell, Jeff? You parked next to a thunderstorm. They can see us. We're supposed to blend in. Number 3. Military footage. This is the best kind of stuff to find on the old interweb. When you get legit military footage of stuff going down, it makes it so much more real. This was shot on January 12th in 2007. 2 fighter pilots report seeing something that looks like a floating rock just hanging out around 17,000 feet. A super casual thing for a rock to do. They keep trying to get close so they can get a better look, but every time they would get too close, it would disappear and then reappear somewhere else, like it was using some sort of short-range teleportation. It did this a couple times before it completely vanished. What was this thing? Well, either a flying rock or something much more advanced. If these aliens are actually real, then why don't they just come down and hang out? Tell us about space and stuff and then come try out churros. We've got so many churros. Number 2. Space disc. Space disc does sound like some sort of futuristic sport thought up in the 90s, but we're talking about an actual flying saucer seen in space. This footage was caught off a satellite and you can see some sort of saucer slash disc slash casserole frying pan flying off Earth and then disappearing into the black void. This one looks massive, like super huge. It's hard to tell because there's obviously not a lot you can use for perspective to see how big this floating space thing is, but I'm gonna take a guess that this is the biggest one we've had on the list so far. I'm wondering if that means bigger aliens, like a bunch of Shaquille O'Neals running around a spaceship turning knobs and dials saying bleep bloop and wearing jumpsuits. That's how I picture aliens, in case anyone's wondering. Number 1. Everything is bigger in Texas. Yeah, everything is bigger in Texas, even the UFO sightings. This one comes from Stevensville in the Lone Star State, and it's a recorded UFO sighting from 2008. This is where an entire town saw an alien formation that was over a mile long and was moving in perfect formation. It was hundreds of spacecrafts. An Air Force pilot who saw this insane happening said that these ships were moving at speeds of up to 3,000 miles per hour and never broke their perfect parallel lines. The Air Force tried to say that they were doing some formation practice with 10 fighter jets that night, but the people were like, nah dude, we saw hundreds of spacecrafts. None of them look like a 1016 fighter jet. This is like when you find out the truth about Christmas and your parents are like, no, Santa did it. Just tell me the truth, dude. I may look stupid, but I'm only a little stupid.
For number 10 spot, we have the Lake Huron UFO. Just this past weekend, on Sunday, February 12th, US officials were able to confirm that the Air Force and the National Guard had downed a UFO that was seen over Lake Huron, which has a shoreline that is shared by the US state Michigan as well as the Canadian province of Ontario, where I am right now. Representative Alyssa Slotkin, a Michigan Democrat, not only confirmed the downing, but also took to Twitter to write, quote, "Great work by all who carried out this mission both in the air and back at headquarters. We're all interested in exactly what this object was and its purpose." Of course, this only worked to fuel rumors over what exactly this UFO could actually be or where it came from. from. The Department of Defense is said to have been tracking the flying object for some time before it decided that action needed to be taken in order to get the object out of airspace. So far, while there still hasn't been any confirmations of what exactly this object was, it has been described as a quote octagonal structure. Right now, recovery efforts of the debris is underway, but as of filming this, there have been no official reports of what exactly this UFO might have been or where it came from. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Yukon UFO. On Saturday, February 11th, just a day before the Lake Huron UFO, a US fighter jet shot down this unidentified flying object that was in the skies above Yukon, a Canadian territory. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took to Twitter to let Canadians know that he had ordered the quote takedown of an unidentified object that violated Canadian airspace. In an effort to take down the UFO, both Canadian and US aircrafts were scrambled, and Air Force members took to the sky to execute the successful downing of the object. Canadian forces are now working to recover and analyze the wreckage of this UFO to hopefully identify its origin. The North American Aerospace Defense Command, also known as NORAD, had initially detected the object flying at a high altitude over Alaska on Friday evening, and on Saturday is when it crossed into Canadian airspace. Pentagon Press Secretary Brigadier General Pat Ryder explained that, quote, a US F-22 shot down the object in Canadian territory using an AIM-9X missile following close coordination between US and Canadian authorities. Both Canadians and Americans are on high alert with this UFO, considering it is just one of the many that have been taken out of airspace in the last couple weeks alone. Like I mentioned before, right now the Canadian Armed Forces and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are working on recovering the wreckage, but the FBI will also be working closely with the RCMP during the investigation. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Alaska UFO. Okay, we're doing like a reverse timeline for these few points because now we are talking about the Alaska UFO that was shot down one day before the Yukon UFO. It was like Alaska, Yukon, Lake Huron. On February 10th, an F-22 US fighter jet shot down an unidentified object over the waters near Alaska. The object was said to have been caught flying at an altitude of 40,000 feet and was deemed a quote reasonable threat to aviation, which is why the orders were given to take it down. The object was first detected the day before, and a flyby happened on the Thursday it was seen, before the second flyby and takedown which took place on the Friday. Here's where things get really suspicious though. The pilots who were sent up to investigate and take down the UFO all gave differing reports of what it was that they saw. Some of the pilots even say that the UFO interfered with their sensors, and others claimed that they couldn't see any kind of propulsion system on the object, which poses the question, how could it have possibly been just casually cruising 40,000 feet in the air? In a statement over the weekend, the US Northern Command said that they have no new information about the object's quote capabilities, purpose, or origin, and they also explained that the recovery efforts are being slowed down by the icy conditions in the region. The National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications, John Kirby, said of the object, quote, we're calling this an object because that's the best description we have right now. He continued to say, quote, we don't know who owns it, whether it's state-owned or corporate-owned or privately owned, we just don't know. People are especially concerned about this UFO in particular because of the important military sites in Alaska, as well as its very close proximity to its neighboring countries. In our number 7 spot today, we have the balloon. On February 4th, it became public knowledge that officials were monitoring a strange object in the sky that they claimed had entered airspace above Alaska on January 28. They monitored the object as it later drifted from Idaho southeast to the Carolinas before the decision was made to take it down. This operation was carried out and the object was shot down. As it turns out, this object was realized to be some kind of a balloon. The balloon is said to have been about the size of 3 buses, and it was flying at an altitude of around 60,000 to 65,000 feet. Authorities were able to discover that the origin of this object was from China, but there are conflicting accounts of what its purpose might have been. China has maintained that the device was a civilian aircraft that strayed into American airspace, but senior American officials are seemingly believing that the balloon was originally supposed to conduct surveillance. Many believe that the spying was to be done over US military bases in Guam and Hawaii, but winds carried it off course to Alaska, Canada, and finally the United States mainland, where it was then shot down. Whatever this balloon was for, I'm just glad that we know what this one was and where it had come from, because some of these other recent UFOs are just too mysterious. In our number 6 spot today, we have the classified report. We are just scratching the surface of our time in 2023, but already there were some crazy announcements, including one regarding a report that was delivered to Congress from the Director of National Intelligence. Basically, since August of last year, there has been a total of 510 quote unidentified aerial phenomena observed in protected airspace or near sensitive facilities. According to the report, 26 of these were described as drones, 163 were labeled as balloons or balloon-like entities, and 6 were described as clutter, whatever that means. This is all fine and well, but the concern sets in when we consider that this leaves 171 sightings unaccounted for, some of which, quote, appear to have demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities. It's also important to note that the majority of these sightings are coming directly from Navy and Air Force pilots. Here's the thing, what we as the public know is only a 12-page declassified summary of the actual real secret report that was delivered to Congress. Only time will tell if we ever find out what the rest of the report includes or what will happen with further investigation into the 171 sightings, but hopefully if answers do arise, one day we'll find out. In our number 5 spot today, we have the 2021 UFO. On February 21st of 2021, a blogger was using a radio scanner to try and pick up from an aircraft when he received much more than he ever expected. He intercepted the transmission of the wrong aircraft, but at the right time. As an American Airlines flight was headed from Cincinnati to Phoenix around 1:19 p.m., the pilot came on the radio to ask the question, "Do you have any targets up here? We just had something go right over top of us." After this, he followed up with, "I hate to say this, but it looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast right over the top of us." Not only were FAA air traffic controllers not able to see any object in the area on their radar scope, but they still have been unable to identify exactly what it could have been. This does happen more often than any of us really know, and it is possible that the object could have been a part of some covert military or Navy operation, but it certainly raises some alarm bells that it was unable to be tracked in any sort of capacity. I wonder if this is one of those stories that will remain a mystery, or if one day we'll get some sort of answers as to what exactly happened here. In our number 4 spot today, we have the 2023 sighting. This UFO video was taken recently on January 22nd, and the video was posted to Reddit by a user called MaxKeller96, and with the video, they gave some context. Quote, "My sister, dad, and I were out hiking near Picket Post when one of us noticed something glimmering near the mountain, so we stopped to look at it. All I could really make out is that it was a small bright dot in the sky. After a good 15 seconds of staring at it, just silently hanging in the air, trying to figure out what the was, I started recording. Sorry it's shaky, I could barely see my phone screen and was trying to get a good look at it with my own eyes. It then dropped 2 flare-looking things, though my sister swears she counted at least 3, and then it instantly sped off, heading south-ish. Up until that point, I thought it might have been a helicopter or a drone, as there's a lot of military/Air Force-based stuff out here, but there's no way anything can accelerate that fast. We all lost sight of it nearly instantly after video cuts, and we were all properly freaked out about it. I've replayed the video probably 100 times and tried showing it to everyone I know, and no one had any idea what it could be other than a super high-end drone. If you think you know, please let me know. After watching the video also probably 100 times, I can definitely say that I have no idea what they all saw that day, because I also really don't think it was a drone. I also have to say that this video even gathered people together on Reddit, and that is no easy feat. Redditors are ruthless, and often very skeptical, and still people are pretty on board and confused over what this could have been. In our number 3 spot today, we have the USS Princeton UFO. This UFO sighting comes from 2004, but footage of it was released in 2017. On November 14th of 2004, the USS Princeton noticed an unknown aircraft of some sort that was about 100 miles off of the coast of San Diego. For 2 weeks prior to this crew had been tracking a strange flying object that would start out around 80,000 feet before extremely quickly dropping to hover right above the Pacific Ocean. Black Aces Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate of Strike Fighter Squadron 41 went over in 2 fighter jets in order to kind of scope out the situation, and when they arrived, they saw what at first appeared to be churning water while there was an oval shape just below the surface. After this, a white oval-shaped object appeared above the water, but it had no markings on it, like no windows, nothing that would indicate an engine, no wings, and the infrared monitors on the jets didn't pick up any sort of exhaust, which is especially peculiar when we think of what the pilots who just shot down the Alaska UFO said. No propulsion, right? Gives me chills just thinking about it, because how could that be possible? The commander and Lieutenant Commander fighter tried to intercept this strange aircraft, but it very quickly flew away and reappeared on the monitor 60 miles away. Like, when I say quickly, I mean it was moving at 3 times the speed of sound and over twice the speed of the fighter jets. Faster than any kind of technology we currently have. We still don't know exactly what this was because it definitely seems like we don't have the technology to make this sort of thing possible. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Chicago UFO. This UFO sighting comes from November 7th, 2006, and it was at the O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. Flight 446 was getting ready to head to North Carolina when an employee from United Airlines that was on the tarmac noticed a dark gray metallic aircraft hovering over one of the gates. After this, 11 other employees and even a few people who didn't work there saw this gray saucer floating at around 4:15 p.m. The people who saw it explained that it hovered above the gate for about 5 minutes before it just shot itself upwards and broke through the clouds, leaving a hole in the clouds where you could see the blue sky through. The strangest thing, however, is that this flying saucer did not show up on the radar, so the Federal Aviation Administration just called it a weather phenomena and would not investigate it, despite there being around 15 witnesses who all saw exactly the same thing. This story did, however, become one of the most read stories on the Chicago Tribune's website and even went international because it certainly is very interesting. And finally, in our number 1 spot, we have the Stephenville UFO. In January of 2008, in the small town of Stephenville, Texas, a bunch of residents all saw something in the sky that they couldn't believe. In the beginning, it appeared to be white lights in the sky that were first in a single arc, but then they quickly moved to form 2 parallel lines. It was estimated that the lights were spanning about a mile long and half a mile wide. Craziest part is that it was flying at 3,000 miles per hour, which is similar to the speed of a fighter jet, but there was no sound reported at all. The government chalked this sighting up to the US Air Force flight operation, but many of the residents who saw this event on that day were absolutely not convinced and truly felt like they were lied to. Some even explained that what they saw was too technologically advanced for the human civilization.
Want to see more videos like this one? Check out this video next. It's about UFO encounters that the government doesn't want you to know about. Click the video now to find out more. See you guys in the next video.